All right, what is up, everybody? Welcome to Blue Node. What an exciting show we have today. On Blue Node, as you know, we talk about Bitcoin, ordinals, runes, freedom tools, productive paranoia. With me today is from Kraken, Chad Calease. Chad not only is one of my favorite people in the space, he's an old friend of mine. And when I say friend, you know how we always say everyone's friends in this space? Chad and I go back before the days of Bitcoin, which is super cool. Chad, to me, you make a lot of friends in this space, but to know someone before is to kind of know that soul before the world changed digitally. So welcome. I can't wait to have you on the show. We're going to talk about this thing called Productive Paranoia, and you've had such an interesting life being a coder and a creative at an agency. Like you cannot be defined. If I have one friend who literally can't be defined, it's Chad Calease. So, dude, welcome to the show, man.
Wow, what a pleasure, man. It's great to be here. It's great to be here, man. I don't know what to say. That's a heck of an intro.
Yeah, so Chad and I met probably 20 years ago at a Mennonite wedding somewhere in the heart of Indiana.
Yeah, in the middle of nowhere.
In the middle of nowhere, and I was at this wedding. I was kind of the spouse of the person who knew the people at the wedding. So I was like an outlier. Chad was very close with the bride and groom, but we were at the campfire later. It was on a big farm, and they had a go-kart track on the farm. But I remember there was a big fire, and Chad, you were playing your guitar with a slide on your finger, and the guitar was on your lap. And I was like, and you were just like sliding that thing. And with the warm weather and the beautiful night and the wedding and the chill of like all the kids running around barefoot, I was like, I want to be friends with that guy. So
it was amazing, dude. That was amazing. They flew me out there just to do that. Like I really wasn't expecting, they wanted to play, they had that song. Oh my God. Now I can't even think of the name of the song. What song it was, but there was the bride loved the song Sea of Love.
Okay.
Sea of Love. And Lucas, doxing Lucas, he sang. They liked the way I played it on guitar, and so that was my primary purpose there. I was the regent of that song.
Right.
And we met in the barn beforehand. Like we were late getting to like the spiel, whatever the schwack was going on, because we found so much in common.
Yeah, I think we did. So you and I obviously have a very rich history through, I don't know if that must have been like 27, 28, 29, but pre Bitcoin. But I tried to introduce you as best I could, but obviously right now you work at Kraken. We'll get to what you actually do there and to talk about what productive paranoia is. But how would you introduce yourself? You've been a creative, you've been a coder. One of the most unique things about you is when I first went to your house, you showed me one of your many laptops. They're all sitting around the house. He's always having ideas, pulling it up and coding. And tell everybody what you do with your keys right when you get your laptop.
Yeah, I learned, I had a hard time learning to type. Back when I first got into tech, late 90s.
Right.
I was like a lot of people, I was doing the chicken pecky thing. Right. And then I was in Seattle at the time, Mercer Island. I was working in education. I worked at a small private school in Mercer Island funded by Paul Allen, or RIP. And we did a lot of really radical stuff there to meet the needs of our specialized population. And I was spending so much time, and I just was resistant to the idea of typing. And the only thing that worked for me was taking all the keys off of my keyboard and sanding off the letters and the numbers and the symbols. So I couldn't cheat because I kept looking. I couldn't prevent myself from doing that. And so I committed to being able to type I just found this in an old journal. I wanted to be able to type in the dark, in the rain, in a windstorm.
That sentence specifically?
Yeah, that's how I wrote it.
The dark in a
So,
rain in a windstorm. So for all who
yeah,
don't follow us, he takes on a new laptop that he gets. He pries all the keys off. He sands them down so there is nothing on the keys. So
yeah,
when I was like, "Hey, do you mind if I, back in the 90s, like, do you mind if I get on your computer to go on my Hotmail account to make sure that
like
all my
sure.
bills are paid?" And he's like, "Sure, dude." He hands me the keyboard. I'm like, what is this? There's
Oh,
no
blank.
letters. There's no numbers. There's no delete key. There's
No.
nothing. And I was like, I like this guy.
Yeah, there's nothing. I use wood now. So you can buy this really nice wood adhesive, 3M, backed stuff, and it's real wood. And so all the keys on all my lappies are all just wood. And my little guy hates it because he's just like, Dad, I can't use your lappy. But he's starting to. He's starting to, and in all fairness, like any parents out there, like I don't know how much longer keyboards are even going to matter. Like 20, 25 years from now, my little guy, he uses voice rec. He's been using
Yeah.
voice rec since like he was 4 or 5 years old, and he learned right away, like, hey Siri, show me pictures of like Monsters Inc. or whatever. He knew that was going to produce generic results, and he learned to be very specific at a very early age. So prompting comes very naturally for him, right? Being very specific and talking to machines as though they were your collaborator. And I don't know how much longer. Like keyboards, I mean, do keyboards seem kind of slow and kludgy to you, Blue?
Yeah, they do. They do. But
Yeah.
I will say on the iPhone, another story. You were the first person I knew who got an iPhone. I was the second person I knew to get an iPhone, and to this day, so whatever that was 2008, or was that seven?
Seven.
Seven.
Yeah.
App
That
Store was
that was
08.
like this
Okay, App Store was
summer.
08. iPhone was 07, and
Yeah.
I still to this day when I am on my phone and I thumb type, I always am off by one letter. I can't type. And my brother's like, dude, dictate. And I'm like, I haven't crossed over to dictation. So it's just, I guess that's full analog. You and I are both Gen X. That's full analog, just either resisting or not adapting to new patterns, or maybe being more private, not wanting to talk out loud on what I'm saying
Right.
to someone,
That's true. I think in public spaces,
Right.
especially.
Right.
Right. Because no, I don't want to talk. I don't want to, query my AI when I'm around some. Well, I guess I do in there's some public spaces where I feel comfortable doing that. But in waiting rooms where they tend to be
Right.
quieter, it's like, nah, Jen, it's not there yet. That's where the chip will come in handy where I can just think at it.
Right.
Right. I mean, I'm kind of jonesing for that, to be
Do you,
honest, because
do
go
you
ahead.
really want to go bionic? Like, do you really think a chip in your head? I mean, obviously the show Severance is very popular right now, but like, you're like, just bring it on?
Yeah, I'm just kind of bringing it on. I mean, I see, working in information security, privacy, for the last few years, it's been a while. Actually, you mentioned 2007, like that. I had a pal. The reason I got into security was something that happened right around that same time, right? Like I didn't get into security because I was interested in it. Quite the opposite, really. Like I tried to stay out of it. I tried to stay out of hacker communities, conferences. I
Right.
didn't want my name on lists and stuff. Like I didn't want to get on no-fly lists, and you just never know, right? Like the
Right.
hacking. First of all, hacking comes with so much overhead, right? Like it's okay to hack our finances, hack our health, hack this, hack that, but the minute you talk about computers, suddenly it's crime
Right.
only. Like people generally, our minds default to that setting. Right. And I didn't like that. I didn't want to be associated with any of that. But I had some friends who reached out to me right about that same time, man.
Right.
Like the iPhone hadn't quite come out yet. And they called and they were sailing around the world for a year with the kids, that kind of scene. Very successful pals of mine from Juneau, from Alaska. And, they got back to port in the Bay Area to like start the next chapter of their life, I guess like 18 months later ish.
Right.
And more than 5 million of the liquid assets had gone in small batches to a bank in Dallas and then went overseas.
Oh my God.
And yeah, and he called me like a random Tuesday. I was at Omnicom. I was a senior systems administrator. Like they hadn't pulled me out of systems. They eventually pulled me out of systems, the systems group into creative.
Right.
Maybe talk about that a little bit, but that was just kind of happening right around then. And they called me and they said, what do you know about identity theft? And I was like, I've heard of it, man, but I don't have any personal experience with it. Why are you asking me? And he told me this whole story. An FDIC, my ass, right? Like, fuck the banks, right? Because like, there's a lot of things that could have, in all fairness, there's a lot of things that could have prevented that.
Right.
Then for them, but we weren't talking about it. We weren't sharing these kinds of stories, right? We certainly weren't. We weren't having conversations about 2FA, and pass keys and stuff like that.
Right.
Back then, we weren't talking about scam baiting. We weren't talking about romance scams, pig butchering, these kinds of things. And so there was a huge lack of awareness and general education back then. And they wanted to hire somebody that they could trust to figure out what happened to them, because they didn't want to start rebuilding if it was that easy, right? To just lose that kind of, can you imagine? And so they ended up hiring me to help them. And so it started a kind of a side gig on the side, and it turned into a much more involved thing later on. But it took like 2.5, almost 3 years to piece together that whole timeline. And it started, the attack vector was the origin of that particular incident was a stolen passport about 18 months before they left. And they were in South America, and someone made a copy of his wife's passport and sold it to two different individuals. And that set off this cascading, domino effect of things that eventually led to this, significant, it destroyed them financially. Right. And we don't hear this, like, he and his whole family had to get completely new identities. They had to get new social security numbers. They're U.S. residents,
right.
Citizens, and very few people know what that's like, right? But it happens all the time. And if that ever happened to me or you, Blue, right? If we had to get a new social security number, we would not be able to rent cars. We wouldn't be able to make large purchases. We wouldn't be able to get credit.
Right.
Like it seriously hamstrings you. And so anything we can do to raise the costs for criminals and minimize these preventable risks, because there's a ton of preventable risks, right? And that's what productive paranoia is about, right? It's like Kraken value. And it's, my primary charter, in the organization is to kind of forward this, in our culture and in our, help protect our clients and our vendors and our partners,
right.
and everybody, the larger, ecosystem, and certainly the larger, crypto community, is that there are so many risks that are preventable. And if we can, even eliminate them or reduce the likelihood, that's awesome.
Yeah, it's funny. I was going to name this show, we are at live, like, security with Chad from Kraken. And you're like, dude, we don't use the word security. Like, is that like the scary snooze button where people are literally like, get away? So you changed it to Productive Paranoia, which I absolutely love. But I guess before we get into Productive Paranoia, I do want to set the table. I should have done this at the top of the show, but I always get so excited talking to guys like you. Just like, again, how would you, like, in a 60-second or a minute 20 elevator pitch, how would you even describe who you are? So you helped these people, got into InfoSec. You were already a coder. You were already a creative. You're the one that got me when X used to own Vine. You got into 6-second videos. Like, you just always gravitated to me, like, the analogy I always use is like the Brooklyn kids with Hush Puppies, which is some like 2004 reference to like, where's the zeitgeist of cool at any given time? And you're one of those people who is way on the bleeding edge of where things are going. And, you and I are Gen X, so it's like, we're getting older. We've got families. I don't want to say we're slowing down, but our priorities change and who we are changes. Like, how would you summarize the creative Chad with the coder, no keys on keyboard Chad? Like, I don't even know how to ask the question. Who the F are you?
They call me Chad GPT at work. Yeah, I think that sums it up pretty well. I mean, I feel like, you ever have the feeling that you've been doing the same job your whole life? Because that's how I feel. I feel like, when back in the early days, like Seattle, the early days of the internet, nobody really knew anything about the internet. There's a lot of parallels, right, to crypto, AI. There's a lot of, people that are scared about AI, a lot of people that were scared about the internet, right? People who were like scared about the automobile, the automobile showed up. They're like, well, what about Charlie, our horse? He's always been a part of our family.
Right.
Like, people really worried.
What do we do with these big sheds where we shove the manure to? Like, they're going to go out of business. Be like, yeah, that's okay. Things will be okay. The looms and the Luddites, like, guys, it'll be okay.
Yeah, man. I mean, I feel like even back then, I was just a teaching assistant, at the Children's Institute for Learning Differences on Mercer Island, and
Right.
my job was to translate. They didn't care how we did it, but we had these kids, these young kids, students, between the ages. They lumped me in with like the 5 to 9 year olds. I was like 22 or whatever, and I was young. They said, we don't care how you do it, how you get assessment data for these kids. We just need it so we could justify the $37 bazillion or whatever a year it was.
Right.
To have them in this school,
Right.
So we needed, somewhat orthodox assessment data, but we collected it in very unorthodox ways. And a concrete example is like, we would write these complex stuff. Like I wrote like one time this like JavaScript generator that would generate these 3-pane comics for a topic that you fed to it, and it would generate these stick figure comics, and the kids would use this to like measure their reading comprehension, for example, right? We had to gamify a lot of this stuff,
Right.
but we used a lot of like off the shelf software, right? Like Flight Simulator. One day we had this idea like, oh, we can assess this kid in math using Flight Simulator, rate of descent, fuel consumption, like all these things that were fun and practical, concrete things in the real world would made these, helped us make these abstract
And
things.
your assessments, what were you assessing? Like their progress?
Capacities.
Because I think it's important, and I hope you don't mind me going here, but you turned me on. I've learned a lot from you over the years, but one of them was about neurodivergence. And I want to bring that in right now because you're a neurodivergent dude. And when I met you, you don't rock as much as you're doing it right now. I think you get excited, you rock, but like to me, it was very, maybe to some people it made them nervous, but to me, you're rocking. Like, and when I say rocking, like you would rock, and it made me feel calmer. I don't know if that's how most people felt, but you had me read a book called, I believe it's called Neurotribes. And it's like 1,200 page book on
R.I.P. Steve Silverman.
Say it again.
Steve Silverman. He just passed through.
Oh shit.
But he's a titan. We owe a lot of awareness and education to his work. Neurotribes was revolutionary.
Because did it make you feel, because you've always tried to explain to me, I'm sure all of us have a touch of something. Like I know as a kid, I was, believe it or not, like if I didn't know people, I was far more introverted, and now I don't know what kicked it out. So I think in some ways I feel like I can relate, in others maybe I can't at all. But I always, like when I read that book, it enlightened me to, it's like, dude, quit. Like a lot of them are like, look, I am who I am, and the type of person I am is probably necessary for this world too, because you guys are kind of crazy here.
Yeah. Sorry, my camera turns out it's a wellness hack. I have it automatically set. I have like Magic Lantern firmware on this Canon 5D. But it automatically times out every 30 minutes, and I like it. Like I could make it so it doesn't do that. But otherwise, I do that so that I have to get up at least once every 30 minutes, and I can keep track of time. Otherwise, I would work for like 5-6 hours straight.
Yeah, I'm guilty of that too, but I think that's good. But my dog is my whatever that tracking software is called, because he's like ball. Oh, sorry, nope, not right now. Sorry.
Say his name. You don't use him in any passwords, do you?
No. I'm not that stupid. No. So, but tell us about the neurodivergence and how it ties in with kind of, I don't want to say it defines you, but it's like you've embraced that as an adult. And I found like, I'm most attracted friendship wise to people who are themselves, and you are decidedly you are no one else. Like I've not met anyone, like if there's buckets of people, I've got plenty of them for my normie friends and my softball friends, and no offense, softball friends, and my golf friends. But like, dude, I can't, like, there's no bucket that fits you.
I was born with hyperlexia. And that was a relatively new thing, in the 70s when I was born, and nobody really knew much about it. I don't even think that definition was established until like the early 60s, or I hadn't really even been around that long. But I started reading street signs, blurting out street signs from the backseat of the car when I was like 2, and my dad was like, "This is going to be a problem for us. Like he's not gonna fit into the school system." Like my dad was already like,
he knew.
Well, I think he understood. He always used to tell me, "Chad, IQ tests don't measure how smart you are. They measure how much it's going to cost to educate you."
So your dad was,
right?
Not going into super big detail on your dad, but in many ways, thank goodness he was a perfect dad for you, because he showed you the world. And it sounds like he at least understood the son that he got.
Yeah, absolutely.
Fair?
And there weren't any illusions about that part of it, but there wasn't a lot of support. There wasn't a lot of awareness. Everyone, even the most academically decorated person who worked in the space back then, had their own eloquent way of saying they knew absolutely nothing about it. And you get a lot of that today too.
Yeah.
But there's a lot more general awareness now than there was back then, right? So my mom took me to a specialist that was like walking distance from our house at the time. I was like 3 or 4. And the famous story goes that on her way home, she had this word hyperlexia in her head. And there was no prognosis. There was no plan. There were no services or anything. And she decided on the walk home not to even tell my dad that word, because he would invariably have asked, "Well, what's the plan, Barbara? What do we do from here? Where do we go from here?"
Right.
So she never told him about that. And so I grew up, very in a very inclusive household. I mean, my dad took me on a ton of business trips. I got excused from a ton of school. I skipped a bunch of grades, which sucked because, emotionally, socially, I was way behind my peers. I might have been intellectually ahead, but it didn't feel like it, because all the rest of it, I felt like I was always trying to catch up. And so, there was this dilemma. I think now it's different. I have a little guy, he has an IEP, and, a lot of people know what that is.
Yep.
But I think it makes, all the difference to just have, like Steve's book, telling these stories, and, you probably know somebody that's impacted by, a neurodivergence of one sort or another.
Yeah. Absolutely. So I appreciate you taking us in that detour, but to kind of sum it up clumsily, you are a coder, you're a filmmaker. I've totally forgot about the beginnings. You're a teacher, you're an educator. And I think it's a perfect time as we launch into not security, but productive paranoia. We've seen a lot of hacks and ordinals. We saw Odin Fun, which is kind of the most popular thing right now, get hacked. Like
another great case for, smart contract security. A lot of these things are going to be becoming, more and more part of the conversation at the forefront, at the outset, right? Rather than something that is, considered later. And I think being productively paranoid, that's why Kraken, and I have to give some love to, my boss, Nick Prococo. Like, he's the one that, really forwards a lot of this and establishes a lot of these values in the way that we present this. Because there's a bazillion ways to do personal security and privacy, and there's ways that really make people feel small and powerless, right? Like cybersecurity, like you say that word, it sucks all the air out of the room. Right?
Well, do you remember when you had your company and you were like, dude, I want to lock down your thing, and you were kind of using more of those words. So I feel like you've evolved in knowing. And what did I do? I was like, yeah, I'll get right. Because it was like, I didn't want to, it, not that you were making it shameful, but it to me, it felt shameful because I'm like, I don't know if I want to know how vulnerable Mike is, because you have some of these stories, and when you've shared them before, you've told me in tears, like, because people, like you said, now you're giving us the more podcast version, but you were in tears because your friends got so hurt and their lives got destroyed from security, and you were like, damn it, I'm going to help. So let's transition real quick to. So you work at Kraken now. Like you're not the only person, but you're one of the few people I know. Like if there's a position open at a company and then they fill it with Chad Calease, then they haven't done their job getting to know who you are. The only job that works for you, in my opinion, is one where they meet you and they're like, oh, wow, this guy's like 360, knows coding, knows security, knows filmmaking, and they created a custom job for you at Kraken because you're so unique. So you work with Kraken, in my opinion, is probably one of the most secure institution. Like when you hear about the Coinbases, and these are my words, these aren't yours, but when you hear about all these breaches and hacks that happen everywhere, like it's funny because not only do you not, like Kraken doesn't like wave a flag, be like, see how great we are. You guys just go about your business, and security is built in everything you do. So tell us what do you do at Kraken?
Well, like I said, I kind of get the feeling you've been doing the same job your whole life. I mean, I feel like I'm in a nutshell, if I had like my elevator pitch, I'm a translator. And I translate complicated things into I transmit them in ways that everyday people can understand them. Right. And it doesn't really matter what the topic is. In this case, it's security and privacy, crypto, certainly those things are really important and at the kind of the emotional center of what we're doing, right? Our mission is the adoption of crypto, right? Financial inclusion and freedom. And, I have to give a shout out to Jesse and Ton, our original founders. They came to the aid of Mt. Gox. Right. I mean, they were part of that, and they wanted to build something that would not be subject to the same pitfalls, right? That would provide a better experience for people.
And when we talk about Jesse, you're talking about Jesse Powell, the founder and the CEO or chairman of Kraken, right? And who was the other person you mentioned?
Ton. And but the point is I really want to make is that like the culture that they've created, like the security first culture that they've created, right? I mean, that's a security above everything. I mean, that's a part of our brand, right? Kraken's brand is security first, and that isn't easy to do. It requires a great deal of attention to do that. And so I have to also transmit a great deal of gratitude because this role that I'm in is aligned with me personally. It's not just a job. Like it's really personal to me. I mean, my grandmother was scammed, out of her insurance. When my grandfather died, he took care of her, and the first guy that she met romanced her for 3 years and took everything. Oh my God. It was a very long-term play, and the second that he had access, to everything, he was gone. And so, I mean, this is the kind of, and also like, other things too. Like, I mean, my dad wasn't an artist or a photographer by trade, but he spent a lot of his free time. We had a dark room in the house, and I grew up developing black and white photos. Black and white was kind of much easier to deal with than color back in those days. And one thing that we always did together, he traveled a ton for work, so I didn't see him that much. But whenever he was around, one of the rituals that we had between us was we would take the negatives down to and put them in a safe deposit box and log them. And when he died, I went on a pilgrimage of like 7 states and 13 banks to collect these. And so like resilience, you're sick of hearing me talk about how, resilience is a behavioral challenge, right? Our habits determine a lot of our risk, mostly more than tech. And that was kind of ingrained in me from day one. So I'm really kind of a communicator about resilience. I'm kind of a science and technology communicator, probably more than anything.
So at Kraken, to put it in layman's terms, you're a communicator, you're a translator. Tell us what you do at Kraken. And I know like it's funny for people who don't know, like I said, Chad and I have been friends for a long time. So like my little heart's on a stick, like you notice how he just like, to him, it's so natural. I got that from Chad because like, I loved it. Like sometimes I feel like it's yours. And I asked your permission if I could use it. I love using it, but to you, it's just a natural reaction. And it's so great because like when I have comments on the screen, people could be saying something, but I'm commenting to the person on the screen like, hey man, like good to see you. Or like, hey, salute. Well, it's obviously the crypto GM, like salute you. Like, I love you. Thanks for being out there. Thanks for supporting the show. But to me, that those little bits of communication, like we communicate with our faces, we communicate with what we don't say, we communicate with our body language, but we also communicate obviously on these screens with emoji, but you brought it to real life, you know, and I copied you because it's on a stick and it's freaking badass. So
It's awesome, man. It helps me listen. You know, I mean, I have to give shout out to my friend Brandy. I mean, she, right like when COVID hit, she's a kind of a well-known graphic facilitator in the space, and she runs a symposium every year in Europe. And she said, you know, I'm not going to be able to do it in person this year. I'm going to have to figure out how to do this remotely. Can you help me? I want to hire you. And, you know, I get, you know, this, or Blue, I get calls like this all the time, you know, like out of the blue, people will call and say, can you help me? And I was like, it's not really my wheelhouse, but, gratefully, they think that however I think about stuff can help them. And this was a case like that. And I helped her figure this out. And, you know, within about a month or so, we had a really great setup for her to be able to, you know, transmit this whole conference remotely with multi-camera shoot and all this. And we started doing this. This was her idea. And I took this originally because I was doing school. You know, I have a little guy and I was doing school and work in parallel. I moved my office up into the living room, essentially, you know, we have or the dining room actually, because we have the one whole wall up there is a chalkboard.
Right.
And I thought that's perfect for school.
Right.
But sometimes I was on calls and I had like in-ear headphones at the time. And my little boy couldn't tell when I was on a call or not. So originally this was just red light, green light. Right. And the red light, he knew I was on a call, and the green light I would hold up when it was cool, because he would come to the edge of the desk and be like, yes or no, and he'd wait for me to do green or red. And that's what I originally used this for. And then it turned into like, oh, this can help me listen. If someone's talking, I get enthusiastic and I get a little, sometimes, you know, over dysregulated. And this helps me regulate and make sure that I'm listening. Oh, I can acknowledge that that's a good point. I'm down with that 100%.
Yeah.
Right.
What is, just so I understand, like, what is, in this context, what does dysregulated mean? Like, you get excited and is it almost like a ramjet where it can like rev itself up to like where it's harder than to focus, like you're bouncing in your seat or whatever?
It's not so much focus. It's like I have to slow down and make sure I'm bringing everybody along on the ride.
Okay.
Because, you know, and others, you know, with similar sorts of neurology can identify with this. Sometimes your mind works at such warp speed, and you're moving on. You're playing the game a couple of moves ahead, but you got to bring everybody along with you, especially if you want to collaborate, right? And it's easy to leave people behind, and then you can only blame yourself. I can only blame myself, because I didn't slow down. I became dysregulated, and I was like, oh yeah, and we can do this. And I'm like way over here, but I haven't brought them along on the journey with me.
That's a good point. Because when we think about energy, like, cause I think you and I meet on a very generally high energy, I'll use the word frequency to sound like a hippie, but we do, you know, like you and I meet in a world of ideas, somewhat emotion, probably more you than me, but we meet on this level. But sometimes, you know, if I'm in a social situation, sometimes I just love life so much, and I love learning so much. Like, you know, when I go curling, sometimes I get super fucking excited, like super excited. And usually I'm good at ramping people up with me. But sometimes if your energy's here and you meet, and they're here, and you didn't kind of meet them and, you know, start the engine and heat the car up, then you can just be perceived. Not that I care what people think about it. You could be perceived as a loudmouth, an asshole, all these things. And now that I'm older and both my parents are deceased, I'm like, just bring it. Like I am who I am. Yeah. And if I offend you and you let me know about it, I will definitely take that in consideration and empathize. And sometimes you're right. Like, and I will apologize or whatever, but I'm going to be me, you know, but you're right. There is this matching energy and bringing them up. So you're saying dysregulated, like all of a sudden you could be like, wow. And they're like, oh, you know, like, and then they're kind of going down, and you're like, you know.
Parenting has taught me a lot about that, right? I mean, I think I've learned more pound for pound, you know, per cubic inch time from parenting because I have to slow myself down. I have to, when I'm talking to my
Yeah.
7-year-old, I have to make sure there's a 7-year-old version of me standing next to him
Yeah.
so that I'm considering both sides of that communication, right? Am I communicating in a way that's validating him, right? Or am I just validating myself? Am I just in it for myself?
Right.
And I make that, I've made that mistake, especially in the early parts of, my working life, my work history, before I had any real identity or had any confidence.
Yeah.
I think we all kind of go through that. That's
Yep.
kind of a necessary suffering, right? I mean, like NVIDIA, Jensen, from NVIDIA, he said, the only thing that can really teach you resilience is suffering. And I really agree with that. That really resonates with me because I think, in the end, the kindest people that I've ever met are the ones that, everybody's worst Tuesday is their worst Tuesday. But I think the people that I've learned the most from, some of my greatest mentors and gurus, probably suffered the most.
Yeah. That's really well put. I was, I was born and raised in a nice affluent town. A lot was expected of me. I was a good athlete. I didn't have a lot of adversity as a kid. I mean, I did. I had bumps and scrapes and bruises, but my childhood was at least in my rose-colored glasses, looking back, pretty idyllic. But as I got older, parenting, I'll say it, miscarriages, like all of a sudden I was like, oh, I can't control and manipulate my environment to however I want it. Like I was bred, and it sounds crazy, I was bred to be successful. I is eschewed the right word? I turned my back on some of those traditional things. Like I had friends who were like, what are you doing at MTV? Like, why aren't you in med school or law school? Or I was like, because no, like F that. And I carved my own path from a place where I was supposed to succeed anyway. But until I faced that adversity, and like you said, until parenting, and like you said, meeting the 7-year-old with the 7-year-old or the 14-year-old with the 14-year-old, like I take pride to this day that my kids can still, when the chips are down, especially, they're still coming to me, and they're in high school now, and that's when the window traditionally shuts, and I'll be there and listen because I'm not going to judge. And because sometimes they just need to be vent and need to be heard, and that's made me grow up so much because like you said, like when you have a 9-year-old and they share, it's so hard. Like even hearing a child's voice, and if you're in adult mode, you're just hearing like, you're not meeting them where they are. You don't hear them, you don't see them. You know what I mean? So it's a beautiful thing. And I know with your son and with some of the stories you tell and some of the awesome successes and challenges, like, thinking back now that we're talking about it, I've learned a ton from you, dude.
Well, you've made me think of a really important thing I learned from Tom Robbins. The author, the fiction author, he said, I was like skinny legs and all or something. When you were talking, I thought of this line from Skinny Legs and All. I didn't know I still remembered this. So thank you for inspiring that. But he said something about there's two different kinds of crazy people in the world. And stop me if you've heard this one before.
No.
Like there's the first kind, mom shoots dad, blows the parent's brains out in front of him or something horrific, right? Some unspeakable thing, happens to some of us, right? And our worst Tuesday is really pretty profound.
Right.
And you have that kind of crazy person, right? And without too much difficulty, right? Through like chemistry, but living through chemistry, therapy, there's lots of, scaffolding to help someone like that fall into the rigmarole of society. Well, right. And as more time goes on, there's becomes, seems to be more and more options available. But then there's the second kind of crazy person who has, like you say, idyllic childhood, resources, grows up in an affluent part of the world, healthcare and education and everything. And in spite of all that, a person like that just adopts craziness as a way of life. And the only way you can get someone like that to give up their craziness, in that case, is to convince them that the world is sane. And that argument is completely impossible to support, right? And so you have this kind of dichotomy, this dualism that's ever present in this on this planet, wherever we are in this blue dot, that, I find comfort in it, right? Because we're all kind of striving for that something, it's a heart that helps you listen or whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
I think that's a certain creativity in living that I've learned a lot about, through parenting and good friends like you, like we try to elevate, and ramp each other. That's the goal, right?
100%, 100%. So that was a beautiful story. So tell me, or if you want to do the show and tell, like, what do you do at Kraken? Because I think it's important for people to understand, because then we can get into certain security or productive paranoid features. Because I mean, you have so many great simple tips for people, but like, I think as you and I are discovering right now, the journey is the process is the journey, you know what I mean? And that's the part to enjoy. And so far it's been so fun. You and I share so many memories from so many different eras of our adult lives, right? We met probably in our late 20s or whatever, and now we're still...
I was making tag. We were riffing on tag for a while, right? I mean,
we were going to do a documentary together.
Yeah. I mean, I think
that was a beautiful documentary. That opening was one of the best openings to documentary that I ever saw. But you couldn't use the music because it was that song was so perfect. Like it was he did a thing on just playing as a child. Like now it's all like baseball coaches and shooting coaches for basketball, and like parents, I don't know if they think their kids are getting a free ride or if they're just living vicariously through their kids. The answer to both is probably a resounding yes. But he did a whole documentary on the game of tag, and it was beautiful. And the first 3 or 4 minutes were haunting, it sounds like a weird word to use there, but it's
perfect.
It was perfect because I think what I love about the generation you and I grew up in, Gen X, like we grew up analog kids with Kick the Can and Bloody Murder and all that stuff. And some of us, not all of us, have embraced this digital world. And I think, the boomers, generally had the millennials as children, and you and I are this teeny generation. We're kind of sandwiched in between. And I don't know, man, I think we're the coolest generation. Like hip hop started in our generation. Skateboarding didn't start, but the next generation of skateboarding with ollieing and like the evolution of skateboarding where it wasn't a surfboard with bare feet, that was our generation. Like so many milestones that now are like mainstream sports and taken for granted came, not that we invented it because it was the people in their 20s at the time, but we were the culture that kicked out the old, and we knew the boomers, this last gasp of boomerism was done. And we went back to more of that individualistic, like I'm going to be who I am. I wore plaid pants all through high school because I was a big skater, but I was also, one of the star players on the lacrosse team. So I was like, again, I think that's why I love you so much, because just like you, like in a different way, I was like, not that I said you can't classify me, but I'm just like, I'm not like some of my friends' parents were like, oh, he must live in a bad part of it. His parents must not care about him. Then they met my parents, were like, they're the most loving people ever. I'm like, whatever good friends' parents, like you're the douchebag. Like we don't need your help to fit in the fucking box. No thanks.
Well, boxes, speaking of boxes, like my role, like a good concrete way to transmit to, a diverse audience about the kind of work that I do. It's tied, my role is tied exclusively to compliance, right? And as this industry is one of the most high, if not the most highly regulated on earth. Right. And in a lot of ways, crypto is raising the bar for traditional financial,
100%.
Services. And, that is, still, unfolding, that story is still unfolding. And I find it endlessly fascinating. Like if I were a kid now, if I were entering, a track of learning in college, for example, I'd probably want to get into GRC, like the government's risk and compliance part of it, because, AI is going to be helpful in this context, but the people part of it, I don't know, it might be a while before AI is really good at the people part of it. And that's really what it comes down to is how do we connect like ISO standards, like ISO 27001 or 2, PCI DSS, SOC 2, these kinds of
You're
frameworks.
stressing me out with those words.
Yeah, I mean, these are nerdy
ISO
terms,
9000,
Yeah, I mean, but this is what the GRC world is, and so my role is concretely tied to those. So I lead all the security training, right, privacy training internally to meet those regs, those regulations, and so I have a calendar. A yearly calendar, kind of larger, format trainings that cover these various bullet points and these frameworks specifically. But during the year, I do lots of little things to kind of bolster that and transmit ways in context and a value system that makes sense to our internal Krakenites, right? That makes sense to them in their lives, right? We have digital nomads, people who change countries every couple months, right? It's probably 20-30% of our company, right? We're a remote first company. So you can live and work from anywhere you want, right? You don't have to have your butt in a seat 9 to 5. Like you can build your life around this, right? It's a very evolved way of working. It's not for everybody. I mean, I don't think in Pacific time or Eastern time anymore. I think in UTC.
You were telling me that the other day. So UTC,
Yeah.
so you and I are in the Midwest. So we're right now, I think -6 or whatever.
5. There's a DST, so we're
we're
minus
5
5
now. We're 6, then 5. Now we're
It's
5
6.
now. Okay,
We got to get rid of DST.
So you
dude.
basically right now for you, it's like 4 in the afternoon or whatever, 5 or whatever. So
Yeah.
you don't even think about what time zone you're in. How awesome is that? Does Kraken use UTC because it's just easier? You're all like unified.
It's just easier. We're in 78 countries, I think.
There's only about 123, I think. There's not many more. And
so it's a very global. The culture is one of my favorite things about working there. Is it is so rich. Like I have teammates. Like I'm on the security team, right? I'm on a sub team of a sub team, and there are I love it. Right. I love it. And a couple of my colleagues are in the Netherlands and I love it. My little boy, like very, Dutch, him, he comes across as being very Dutch. He's very matter of fact and to the point, not rude. Right. He just calls it like he sees it. And I love that about this culture because I work with, Dutch, and I love it, right? Like if you watch Ted Lasso, right? Jan Moss, like he's not rude. He's not trying to piss you off, right? He's just telling it like he is. Oh, I didn't make any mistakes. You're the only one who made a mistake, like in the locker room, and I find that really refreshing because in the States, we lived and worked, overseas and you come back to the States. One of the things that I become more and more hyper conscious of is just this over politeness here, right? In the States, it's just like so pervasive everywhere. And it's not like that everywhere, right? And sometimes it kind of gets in the way, like to your point about authenticity. Sometimes it's kind of hard to tell who somebody is or how they really feel because they're trying not to hurt my feelings or constructive criticism is really valuable. I'd much rather have somebody say something constructive because then at least I know they're being honest.
I would too. I think one of the hardest things I love learning everybody's story. The people that are hardest for me to connect to are the people who keep everything super close to the vest and no fault to them. Maybe they're just introverted or shy.
There's probably a reason.
I don't like to, for me, not that I need you to let me know where I stand, but if I'm not getting feedback, to me, it doesn't, you and I are, as we're getting in flow, we're building energy for a show and talking about things. And I think we realize we could probably talk for hours and hours and hours and hours, but it's just, there's a flow and it's fascinating. But with people who are very guarded, I find it very difficult so a lot of people I don't surround myself with, because if there's not candid feedback, because sometimes like, you mentioned Ted Lasso, I performed several times with Jason Sudeikis. And so I did comedy. I was very out there and outgoing, but if I don't have people like close people around me be like, dude, like you went for the joke and you hurt my feelings, I'd be like, you're right, I'm sorry, do you want to talk about it? Or are we cool or whatever, like whatever, like work it out. But I need that feedback because I'm going to be me, but I also want to, I want to coexist with you. And I want to make you feel good and and try and bring your energy to its best too.
Right. That's right. You don't gain anything if you're not willing to give something up. right? I mean, it's just basic, dynamics. And I think about it, very. I have a very simple analogy. I fell in with some Sufis early on in my early days, and they used to talk very plain to each other and argue. And they would set time aside during the day to argue and be mad and channel this kind of negativity, this negative part of things. But they were very pragmatic about it, right? Like they wouldn't cook food when they were pissed, when in that state, right? They wouldn't try to go to sleep. They never went to sleep angry. They would always solve their arguments before they went to sleep. They would always go to sleep at peace. But there was a time and a place during the day where they would argue. And during that time when they would argue and be in that, right, embrace that energy, they would, assign others, me, to the kitchen to cook food who had a better energy, because they would not put that energy into the food, because then that would translate into the people who ate it. That's what they believe. Right. Yeah. And that really compartmentalized. It's like, it's okay. Like, don't run away. I tell my little guy, like, don't run away from your feelings of anger or frustration. Don't try to push them down. Don't Homer Simpson it, man. Like, let it out. But be quick to anger and then resolve it. Yeah. Right. And move on. Right. Otherwise, you got to go back and do that work later. And if you're going to go back, it could be in your 30s, it could be later, but it's going to be too late.
Or on your deathbed, yeah.
To be a kid then, because your values, your responsibilities, everything's going to be different then. Yeah. So it's better to just deal with it as it comes. And I sometimes wonder, like, I have obviously I was like diagnosed with hyperlexia, but I wonder if this isn't just my body processing stress and anxiety in real time. I don't know. I always wonder.
Yeah. And I think maybe that's where we have a lot of overlap, because I think I do too. I maybe there's times where wearing your emotions on your sleeve is not the right and proper place. Like, and maybe certain people aren't people to share it with, but I've always worn it more on my sleeve. But, for me, what you see is what you get, like, and what other way, like when I die, you and I now we're, I say the second half of life, but the great myth is once you get around that 50-year mark, you're like, wow, it's halfway. And then you're like, wait a second, the actuarial tables are saying I'm at like 59 or 64%, like, like it's the great illusion. But then I think, both my parents have died. I believe yours have too. And it just, now we're the front row and our children are, not that we're shielding them from anything, but, as you get older, there's that maturity. But for me, like, I want to, now I'm thinking about, like, not legacy, but like, what can I contribute to the world? Because when I'm like 85 or whatever, if I'm lucky enough to live that long, like, I always want to look back and just be like, you know what? I had fun. I did the things I wanted to do, not at other people's expense, but following my passions and my dreams. I think you were a big inspiration. That I have a bunch of friends, I'm lucky, who started companies and kind of followed their dreams to certain degrees, but you've always almost lived like so in the moment. And maybe hyperlexia had to do with that, or maybe just because you were always outside of the system, it fascinated me. But to me, it's the only way to live, because it brings you closer to the present moment. And the closer to the present moment you become, the happier you are. That's just the truth.
The more you can appreciate it, the less you can take it for granted. I mean, I have to say, I've made a lot of mistakes, and trying to change that about myself, trying to fit in, and it wasn't until even really just the last few years almost that I feel confident. This is the first job. I'm totally cool saying this, and this is the very first job. Like, we used to have an office in Chicago when I first started, like 4 years ago, and I debated. I was like, should I like go in there? Should I wear a suit? Should I go in there and not rock and do what I've always done? And I was like, no, like, I'm going to try something different this time. In my whole life, they're going to find out eventually. Right.
They're going to find out how fucking weird I am. I might as well just rip that Band-Aid off, come in with the Technicolor
totally,
suit,
dude. Totally, dude. Yeah, because I mean, we moved every couple years growing up. I didn't have the advantage of like roots in a single neighborhood.
Right.
I grew up in the States and overseas. I don't have a hometown, and I hated that. It's
Mm,
cool now.
right.
Living, having had a broad experience of places, and a lot of people think, oh, that's great. The grass is always greener. I always wanted, like a much more rooted experience, and I'm able to give that, for my son. But I didn't have that, right? And
Right.
and and I would, when I was on the plane or the train or whatever, moving, I would coach myself almost the whole way, like be like, I'm not going to rock in this town. I'm going to sit still. I'm going to blend in. I'm going to be, like everybody. I was really hard on myself, and it took me a bazillion years, like half my life, to go into this job and be like, I'm just going to be myself. I wore overalls, and I didn't try to like impress. It was raining, like I didn't try to impress anybody. I just went in as myself, and it's better to be. Dad always used to say this too. He's like, it's better to be a first-rate you than a second-rate somebody
Right.
else.
Exactly. You know what's interesting, and I don't know if this is. Well, I don't know what it is, so I'll just say it. Because you embraced who you were with Kraken, you're like, you know what? I'm just gonna be me because like I love me, and it was hard for you to do. I'm sure there was shades of Chad at all these different places, but maybe you didn't fully show it until later. But you rock less now. Not that that even matters, but because you could be you, you're you. And
Yeah.
not that like, cause I'm almost presenting it as like, dude, and you solved rocking. You solved your autism. You fit in because you said I
It's
won't fit in.
still
Because
bad.
that's
It's still bad. The kids still know, like when they go to the train station, that people are going to either be looking at me because they're like weird, what's wrong with them, or they're curious. It's still there. But I definitely, I'm more focused. I'm sitting on a ball, which helps me move my weight around more subtly. I don't have to rock as
oh.
much, right? So I'm sitting on an ISO ball.
So
That's a hack.
the rock is translated or is reverberated through the glutes or the ass cheeks, and then it's just a slow. So that's why I'm seeing you. It's more of a
Yeah.
wave than a rock.
That's why I
But
can sit still on airplanes and trains, because they're moving and there's kind of a vibration. And so my vestibular, it has to do with these bones in our ears, right? And that's kind of the whole thing for me. And as long as my vestibular system is engaged, I don't have to rock as much.
interesting. I mean, how cool is that you know that about yourself? A and B, how interesting is that you can just share it, and just be open about it. Cause I think other people, there's certain things that they're different. They can't relate, but let's be honest, like the human condition, like I always thought as you get older, you realize like, yeah, I'm special. You're special. We're all special. But like, it also makes me realize with a lot of the things I went through in life, the highs and the lows, like it's almost comforting in a way. I'm unique, but I'm also like, I've got the human condition and I'm just like everybody else in so many
Nobody's
ways.
special, man. We all share the same fate, like we're all just on this blue dot, and trying to make sense of it, trying to create meaning,
Yeah. Yeah. We're all,
you
I
know.
mean, cause I'm pretty sure we're all going to die.
Nobody gets out alive, man.
Thank you, Jim Morrison. So,
Yeah.
do you want to? I know you were all excited. Like I told you, we'd go everywhere. You're like, so should I present this? Should I present that? I'm like,
I love it.
dude,
I love
like
it.
Chad, you and I are just gonna talk like we always do. So, but I have absolutely loved this conversation so far. Is this a good time for kind of the show and tell them what you do, and then maybe we'll
Sure.
get into
Yeah,
some like just
for sure.
productive paranoia things that people could do and
Yeah.
think about given all
Should I
the.
share some stuff?
Please, yeah.
Sure.
Let's see if we
You got it,
time this
man.
perfectly. Here he goes. Oh, dude. And we timed
Yeah.
it perfectly. All right.
Nice. I love, one of the things that I love about how you've evolved, right? This show, the format, and everything, it's super friendly. And about me, like I've always been kind of an enemy of complexity. And I use this analogy a lot because I don't know if anybody's ever done this for like an aunt, an uncle, a grandpa. When this is something that us Gen Xers did a ton. What was, none of our parents or friends' parents or even older siblings in a lot of cases knew how to like use hi-fi stuff, stereo systems and VCRs and TVs, and you would have an assortment of these controls. This still exists to a certain degree today, right?
Right.
In some homes. And I spent a fair amount of my childhood doing this, right? Just kind of simplifying that for people. And that's why I say, like, I feel like I've been doing the same job my whole life. Like I kind of have in a lot of ways. I've been just really translating that, to people in a lot of ways. And this is kind of where I'm at today. Like, really none of these things have anything to do with tech. It really has more to do with our habits, the kinds of things that we fear, right? There's a lot of the fears that we have that we don't need to. There's a lot of FUD
Right.
in the media, right? A lot of fear-driven media, right? And that drives a lot of risk, I think, that we could otherwise avoid or even eliminate completely, right? And so my colleagues and friends are, sick of hearing me say stuff like this because this is kind of the emotional center of a lot of things. I think about Bitcoin too a lot. How it's just kind of gone high and then like boom, like bottomed out. Like I think about that a lot.
You love that one. You love that one.
But I really think about Bitcoin and things like this. I really think about like, what are the lows? What are the high lows, right? If you just look at the lows over time, I think this is the best perspective. I don't look at the markets every day. I'm sure, you try not to.
I don't. I don't.
I just don't see the point in it, right? No. Like I'm not doing any of this. I don't think a lot of us are doing this for us. I think a lot of it's for future generations, right? To have a better, fiat's only like 200 years old. You know what I mean? Like cash money system, right? It was like sticks and stones and, it hasn't really been that long.
Well, and that's amazing. It's 200 years old. And think about this, like credit cards are like 60 or 50 years old. And
dude, you know how long it took? It took like 70 years for people to like be open-minded about credit cards.
Right. Right. Because nobody wanted them. At first it was the carbon copies, but credit cards, literally, these companies have inserted 3% levy on everything we buy, for our own protection. And then if you don't pay your bill on time, you're not paying 7 or 8% like your current mortgage. And that's high. You're paying 29%. Like the fact that the lobbyists can keep that one at bay, that's when the banking system and fiat and credit cards, like, you know what, brother, I am done. I went into my bank yesterday and the guy's like, hey, you've got some cash sitting in there. Why don't you put it into CDs? I'm like, dude, or I could like basically put it into USDC at Kraken and get like 5%. Like, sorry, buddy. And I'm not locked in for 4 months to a year. And he's like, yeah, I guess digital assets are pretty cool. I'm like, yes, digital assets are cool.
That's awesome. That's awesome. But, digital assets, a lot of conversations about, AI, right? You can generate pretty much any visual, any sound now. That's pretty amazing, right? And so I get a lot of questions. I have a lot of conversations about this, right? I mean, I think this is coming, with a lot, to some tongue in cheek here too, right? Kind of to the point of a lot of fear-based media. Right. We're going to hear a lot of this, right? A lot of this stuff we're not going to even have to worry about. But I love the idea of like water balloons with oil and sand. That's brilliant. Hackers love to think like this. But this is stuff that like, is it going to impact us on a day-to-day? I don't know. Right. I don't believe everything I see. I don't know that we say that enough. Video hasn't ever been a slam dunk in court either, like in a court of law, right? Like if you had video surveillance footage of somebody, that's not a slam dunk. Right? It wasn't always like, cut and dry. But we just have to remind each other that everything we see, we have to verify. Right? We have to verify, we have to trust before, be careful who we trust. We have to verify before we trust. Right? That's super, super important. And, we're going to see, AI agents, being responsible or behind crime on a new level, right? I mean, I had an aunt, who reached out to me right before the holidays, and her son, I should say my cousin, got a new job. They're in Germany, got a new job in the northern part of the country, was living in the southern part of the country. And the day that he left, she got a couple hours after he left, she got a phone call that sounded like him on the side of the road. He said he was broken down and he needed several thousand euro to jump the line at a garage and get it fixed so he could get, to where he needed to be for his new job. He had some meeting. And of course, she transmitted that money to him.
Wow.
She did. Right. And of course it wasn't him. Right. But they were in their inbox. Whoever this criminal was, like they probably fished them weeks ahead of this. They knew what was happening. And it's way beyond just having a pretext of calling somebody and setting up a scam. Right. They're organized. These criminals are probably not just one person. It's probably multiple people. Right. And this is happening. We're going to see more and more of this, right? We can guarantee, we can pretty much bet. I mean, it's not to say that AI doesn't have like its wonkiness. Like there's going to be times where we're going to be like, maybe that's AI, right? That probably is AI. But generally, it's going to keep making leaps and bounds. If we look at this, like the difference between just a couple of years ago, right, and now, it's going to keep doing this. It's going to keep leapfrogging its capabilities, right? No doubt about it. And we can't really believe. I have to speak out against some of this guidance, because even if this was true at the moment they transmitted it, it's not true now, right? Like we can't count on bad grammar for phishing emails anymore, right? Because that ChatGPT solved all of that, right? So if you're a criminal and you're transmitting, you're building a phishing campaign, there's no way that you're going to make grammatical errors anymore. Even your design aesthetic is going to be spot on,
right?
And so this kind of guidance, I would encourage everyone to ignore this. Like stop looking for clues and images. Just go verify, right? If somebody's Zooming you or calling you and it says it's mom, and you're talking to her on the phone, text her and say, Mom, are you calling me right now? Especially if it seems out of the ordinary, right? If someone's asking you to do something and you're like, your spidey sense, like you got to stop, right? Because like these tools can generate fake receipts. You can get reimbursed for things that never happened, right? You're going to see crime evolve. I mean, this is where Kraken has really done a lot of really great things. Like our partnership with Kit Boga and our fraud team, another shout out to like Nick Prococo, like my boss, like our chief security officer at Kraken, like the way that we are, showcasing productively paranoid, right? I mean, focus on the productive side, right? If you don't know what scam baiting is and you haven't checked out Kit Boga and some of this stuff, Nick's on here with Kit, and it's just, they troll these scammers, man, these criminals. Right. They troll them. They're not just defending Kraken and defending our clients and our vendors and our partners in the larger community. They're pushing back, they're building bot armies to waste these scammers' time, right? And this is how we should feel about this, especially in a fear-driven environment. There are things we can do, steps we can take, choices we can make, habits we can shape that make us feel empowered. And that's what being productively paranoid is all about. It's if you're just paranoia, it'll destroy you, right? But to own this and check out some of these videos, on YouTube, and see what Kit and Nick have done. They make these guys so frustrated. They'll send, assets to the wrong wallet. and these guys scream, they lose their, we don't have time, but we'll get into it. But there's some really great content out there. And it's another reason why I'm really proud, of working at Kraken, because deploying these bot armies to waste criminals' time, like I think this is a really great meme to demonstrate that. Like, the strength in numbers, right? And using AI to build these kinds of tools that have never existed before, because I get lost in the nuts and bolts of AI security, right? There's some really great things we can do. We threat model these things, by the way, to get kind of nerdy for us just a second.
Right.
Like we threat model these systems just like we do any other, like a web server or a mail server. They're not special. Right? We the same kinds of frameworks exist.
Right.
But I think what makes more sense is like thinking about the intention, right? Like, how do I protect my information, right? If I think privacy is dead and I don't think I have anything to hide, then I'm probably going to get pwned, right? I'm probably going to have an attitude that's more paranoia than productive, right? And I think putting the productive and paranoia reminds us that we can have a sense of humor about this stuff.
Yeah.
We can have a lightness about this and have fun with it. And I think that's the difference between the way Kraken does security compared to some other organizations. In a nutshell.
And I love that. I feel like, because I've been around for 10 years, obviously I've got I won't say where I have accounts and where I don't, but what I've always respected about Kraken and what you've been doing at Kraken is that you guys never gloated. And I will say this, and this isn't you saying it, but when FTX went down, there were people. Yeah, it was super unfortunate. Kraken didn't do a victory lap. There might have been some emails, but like, hey, like security is literally our middle name and we're taking precautions. But I will say that other companies, and we all know who they are, they were doing victory laps and they were like this. And I called out one of the top guys there. It was on Farcast. You could probably guess who the crew was. But basically, I was like, dude, I believed in you guys, but you went public. I bought into your stock. You guys basically arranged your auction where you dumped on everybody. I held your bags from like 320 or whatever you debuted at to like $90 and you're doing victory laps, like do better. And the guy was like, oh, well, dude. I'm like, no, your victory lapping just makes me want to use you guys less and less. Like
It reminds me of
I
a
love
cookie.
that Kraken never, you guys just take the high road. You don't make waves about your security.
Never.
You just do
Never.
it, and you've got the right people in
Right.
place.
Dude, it's really true. I'm really grateful to work around so many. I'm just grateful to be a contributing member of a most memorable team and time in history. I mean, it really, I found this cookie. I don't know if I'm still in widescreen mode.
You are now,
or whatever. But I found this fortune cookie. I had this fortune cookie. I don't know how long ago it was. But we ordered Chinese one night. Like my little guy was like, oh, I want lo mein. And so like I ordered some lo mein or whatever. And in my fortune cookie was this. And this is right before all that unfortunate, those setbacks to the whole industry, dude. That was a kick in the, in the groin to the whole industry when that happened. But I found this in my fortune cookie, dude. Right. And on the back, it says, I don't know if you can see this. It says, some want to be bankers when they grow up, but at this rate, they're going to lose interest. Right. And I thought, wow, this is great. These guys, I was so excited about that. I was so excited that it was getting traction and it was, more a part of like a mainstream conversation. More people, friends and loved ones were coming to me and asking me. Their curiosity was stoked. I was so grateful.
Matt
and then
Damon and Tom Brady were, and Larry David were doing the ads. Yeah.
Yeah. But it just was unfortunate that happened. And you're right, dude. Like there's no point. It's just like anything else. Like if you're on a team or you're climbing a mountain, you just want to get to the top. You don't care who messes up today, who makes a mistake, or who wins, who makes a great choice. You just need to get to the top of that mountain together, And I think that's the approach that I have always valued about Kraken. Like we're all about, when I first started, we have a red team. Right. We have red team, blue team. We have, a very, very unique security culture at Kraken. And, the red team hacks us internally. They hack Krakenites. They hack certainly our sites and services, our apps and things like that. Very comprehensive, constantly, iterating and hacking us and increasing the cost for criminals and raising that bar. And that's how we do it. Right. And I think this whole like approach, when I first started, the red team did a campaign and someone in our customer experience team, fell into that and made some choices that weren't ideal. And I thought, I'll be curious to see how they handle this, because how organizations treat those situations says a lot about them, right? You can tell a lot about the values. And I can tell you that person is still here. And not only are they still here, but they are one of the most trusted and, solid. I have watched them evolve from someone who was clueless. Clearly, a lot of people don't work in cultures like this. You can work in Fortune 100. You and I, we've worked with Fortune 100, Fortune 50 companies, and we know that security cultures there are really, could be a lot better. And so it's not
a lot of layers,
better, right?
And in that redundancy in those layers creates the vulnerabilities, right?
It does, right? And I think a lot of it, if you have a lot of our analogies always go back to parenting, right, Blue? Right. But you could, for example, and I'm keeping this particular case in mind, right? You'll see the point where I'm trying to make here in a second. But let's pretend you have a young human, a kid that you're trying to teach to ride a bicycle. Right. And they learn to ride a bicycle, and you didn't give them a helmet or anything. They're just like taking off crazy, and they're 5, 6, 7. They're getting pretty good at it. They feel pretty invincible, right? And then they have an accident. Something happens. They get hurt. They get injured pretty seriously. Stitches, broken bones, something. Right. Now you hand them a helmet. Now they think, now they're 7 and they're invincible. Plus they have a helmet. They're just going to ride even riskier. Right. And I think we make this mistake. It's easy. I've made this mistake, right? It's easy to make this mistake in security, these kinds of environments, these milieus, if you will, right? Where you give someone a helmet and that just gives them a license to care less. Right. And we have to be very intentional about that. Right. When we give someone a tool, a helmet or whatever to shape, you get one chance really to do that. And sometimes if we shame somebody, it works kind of the opposite that we intend. Right. And Kraken didn't do that in this case. Right. They handed this individual a helmet with some guidance and some clarity. A lack of clarity is really cruel. And I think that's, something a lot of people in security cultures, they get phished, they get treated poorly if they open an email. People they don't just check email. They just find workarounds for it, right? So they're not really learning anything. You're just growing their fear, is my point, right? And that's not contributing to.
Why didn't you answer that email? Be like, I'm afraid because I didn't know. Like now, I don't know anything could be phishing. Like
that's not the same thing.
And you're saying you guys build people up. Be like, hey, here's what you did. That and it sounds like you're saying if you do it right, those people become some of the best employees and the champions of your company.
Allies. Absolutely right. And the best thing for a program, it doesn't matter if it's a benefits program, any kind of incentive program, security program, whatever. Right. If you can incentivize allies with knowledge, awareness that doesn't just benefit them at work, but their own personal orbits of friends and loved ones, right? And it shapes the kinds of choices they make in their personal lives. That's going to inform the kinds of things they do for your company when they're at work, right? And I think it doesn't work the other way around. No one ever goes home and says, hey, partner, friend, spouse, whatever, you're never going to believe this cool RSA key or VPN I learned how to use at work today. Nobody ever does that. Right. You know what I mean?
But it has to work the other way around. But it becomes embedded and ingrained, and it just because, I always make the joke, like every once in a while I'll still reach for tea and I'll pull out the silverware drawer and be like, oh, why did she move it? And she moved it 4 years ago. Right. So like being a creature of habit there's certain things where I'm very creative, but there's certain things in my daily life where sometimes I'm not present and I do go on autopilot. And so, sometimes that has to be tested.
Yeah, it does. I mean, I think here's another good thing to share, Blue. I'm going to shift gears here.
Dude.
And share. It's really important in light of this, right? Like this AI stuff. It's not just easy to clone my voice and my face. It's easy to just clone situations, right? And I think it's really important. I'm telling a lot of my friends and loved ones, and certainly colleagues, that it's really important if you don't have a secret code or a passphrase, right? When I say verify before you trust.
I was just going to ask you that, like the phone call, like, hey, I'm on the side of the road. Be like, what's the phrase? Yeah. Boron. Be like,
yeah, exactly, right.
I got you. Unless
it's super empowering.
Right.
And so as long as I have, like, my little guy knows, like if someone comes to his school and says, hey, your dad sent me, you're supposed to come with me because something or whatever is out of the ordinary, he's going to say, what's the phrase, G? And if he doesn't have it, he's not going anywhere.
Well, and the funny thing is, like, the odds are just assume no, but you're saying
assume no.
Yeah. Do you want some candy? Come here, kid.
Totally, dude. We grew up. You said Gen X. We had to deal with that. We had who was that kid who got Johnny Gosh? Remember that name? Ring a bell?
No. Is that like a fake name where they're like, and Johnny grabbed candy from a guy in a car? Johnny Gosh.
No, Johnny Gosh was the kid who got snapped, and they only found his body. They never found his head, or they found his head and never his body. Oh, it was this like haunting story that they told over and over and over again at school. And did you ever get almost picked up by a stranger? It only happened to me once in my whole life.
I'm pretty sure a car had stopped. Yeah. Yeah. And we had a PE teacher that was, as a child, remember in the 70s, parents were like, and go outside, I'll see you, just be home and don't die. And
that's it. Yeah.
There was no phones. There was no, and everyone knew. I always thanked my lucky stars that my birthday was over summer break. So, but he would like spank people for their birthdays, and he'd take them into his office, and they get to find the jelly beans. And like, even as a kid, you're like, creepy, weird, but it's not like I then went to my parents and said, like, just so you know, this guy's creepy, weird. I'm just putting that on your radar. You know what I mean? Like, so, but I like won the ball throw as a kid, and he was like, ice cream, let's get ice cream. And I was like, nah, I'm good. Let's get ice cream. And finally, like in 5th grade, I was leaving the school. It was like the last day of school. I let the guy take me out to ice cream. And then the whole time I was just like, get this over with. He drove me home, and he's like, hey, I had a really good time. And he tried to put his hand on my knee, and I was like, thank God there's a fucking door handle, pulled the door handle and left. And I was like, why did I even put myself in that situation? Because we didn't know to say shit. And I know for a fact that he abused my brother and sister are way older than me. I know in their generation, because they knew the same creep factor, and I can guess which kids in my class got abused, and it just effing sucks. So anyway, sorry, you asked and I told you times 40,
cool.
but yeah, but I also have had a car.
It still happens.
Yeah,
it's still happening. Like that same thing is still persistent, and even in fancy affluent neighborhoods, it still happens, right? I mean, it's not anything I think that's changed. It's maybe a common thread, right? And so it's this advice, this guidance is really useful in many contexts, right? If somebody comes to my front door in a hard hat and a yellow vest, I'm probably not going to answer it.
Right.
Number one, right? Who answers their door to some unannounced visitor? Right. But I'm not going to believe, I'm not just going to take it at face value. And I think that's one of the things I'm grateful to AI for, because I think it's bringing a lot of that to the surface. And it's always been important. It's always been important, right? To say, hey, it's up to us. Like, no one's going to protect us from this, right? There's no cavalry coming to save us, point this out, right, or say, hey, this is legit or this isn't legit. Companies aren't incentivized, right? They don't make any money off of raising our awareness. So that work kind of falls on us as consumers, right, to determine like what is and what isn't a risk, right? And I just think this is really great advice, and it's empowering, right? I mean, the battles of taste will never be won, right? I love this meme because it's, you say you love privacy, she says she loves privacy, but we're very different, right? She's using like incognito and Google everything, and he's all proton mail, So I mean, the battles of taste will never be won. Right. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that there's some really simple, practical advice, things we can do. Like if someone tells me they're using hardware security keys, like, yeah, I mean, you want to reduce your preventable risk. And I think that's I frame these kinds of conversations, security, right, privacy, into like the same conversation a lot of times. It's managing anxiety, right? It's really, in a lot of ways, it's just peace of mind. It's about, how do I maximize my peace of mind? How do I get rid of this FUD? How do I offload this FUD that they're giving me through these, social media channels and, network broadcast, wherever people get their information from. And, this really sends me tingles when people say, oh, I use a YubiKey. I'm like, oh, cool. Good for you, because that cognitively has an impact, right? I'll sleep better. There's certain things that I do, and I guarantee you, and anyone listening to this, if you change some of the habits, you don't know it, but you're offloading a heck ton of cognitive overload that you may not even be aware of. And you will, stress is what kills us. Stress is what causes cancer and all this other stuff. Like you treat the symptom, treat the patient. And so a lot of these things, are practical, at the end of the conversation. It's just 2FA, man. Like, get 2FA in your life. It doesn't matter how. If you're using a YubiKey, a passkey, even OTP, like over SMS, is better than not. I know it's another step and it's kind of a hassle, but 2FA is going to radically lower your overhead. And especially as like this AI stuff. I mean, look at this. I mean, we're going to start seeing this on levels. This is just the beginning, right? I mean, this isn't going away. This is just going to continue to be like, wow, like, you can't even tell the difference anymore between something that's synthetic. And so I think we'll always be able to count on humans building memes that are maybe a little more ridiculous. I think humans will lead the ridiculous charge way more than AI. AI can be ridiculous, but it's a certain kind of, would you agree with that?
Yeah, I'm watching the video. Wait, what's the metaphor here? Sorry, I completely...
Well, the sound isn't coming through,
so
right?
Great, yeah.
The sound isn't coming through, but these two birds are like, "Hey, what's your name?" The guy's like, "The other guy's, well, what's your name? Well, fuck you too," right? It's just ridiculous. Right. The kids were sending this back and forth a couple weeks back, and I just thought it was just ridiculous and hilarious. And AI, doesn't produce things that are this ridiculous and funny in this kind of very human way. Right. It probably won't take long, right? For it to get there. Right. But right now, like, some of these memes are just really incredible. But again, and Randall, we've talked about this over and over again, like, it's really just reinventing the wheel, all these things. I mean, I find great comfort in that, that really, no matter what the tech is or the lingo or whatever, it's just a new version of the wheel. And so that I'm not afraid of that. I love wheels, and, we all kind of open to this, but as the wheel kept iterating, it generated the same kind of fear. When people would see a new wheel, they felt like their version of life as they knew it was over. And That's just ridiculous.
Yeah, this is so cool. I'm just watching the wheel. So I was wondering, is it going to turn to a bike wheel, motorcycle wheel, car wheel, mag wheel? Oh, dude, that's so cool.
Right. And so these texts, it's just like when the newspaper was invented, the printing press, people thought it was the end of the world or whatever. And the internet, when the internet came out, we were like, oh, the end of publishing as we know. It's like, nah, man, like it made it more accessible to people. And I think that's what we can expect. That's what makes me really excited. And, when Michael, I love to juggle. Right. I'll wrap up with this. Like, I love to juggle, and I use juggling as an analogy for security a lot of the time, because security, like juggling, like when you say juggling, people are like, oh, 3 balls, big deal. How do you innovate on that? Right. Yeah, it's cool, but it's boring after 5 seconds.
Right.
Right. But occasionally someone breaks through that, and doesn't just break through that, but just shatters, just decimates our expectations of what's possible. And I don't know if you remember Michael Motion. Do you remember this guy from the 80s?
Not really, no.
Do you know him? So, like, this was about the time.
I'm guessing that's not his real last name, though. I don't know.
It is.
Oh, really?
It is, but it's an Moschien.
Oh, okay. Maybe you notice a lot of people's real last names kind of fit who they are, like especially bad guy last names. You're like, that's really
it's true though. It's true though, but they do. It's like onomatopoeia. Is that what that's called? Like when it sounds like what they are. And when he showed up, like, I learned how to juggle because I had a physics teacher, and we had to do this AP assignment for, like, write a paper at the end of the year. And I, like anybody, I hated it. And I went to him and I said, hey, Mr. King, he was cool. I said, are there any alternatives to writing a paper? And he thought about it for a second. He was like, I tell you what, man, Chad, if you can learn to juggle for 2 minutes without dropping it and talk about the kind of some of the core principles that you learned this year, I'll accept that.
No kidding.
And I was like, you're on. And I started to learn to juggle that day. And I was like, it was impossible. I didn't know. I had to convince myself that I could do it because it was really overwhelming. And not too long, I think the year after that, this guy showed up. I had, we didn't have YouTube, right? We didn't have anything like that. I was going to the library and reading books about juggling. I went to a circus to, talk to clowns and get tips. Like, I was obsessed, me, like once I'm hooked on something, I'm going to talk to the source as close as I can get to the source. I'm going to try to get as close to the source. And later on, like the year after that test, which I passed, by the way, I dropped it on 1:59, 1 minute 59 seconds. I dropped it, but he still let me go. Michael Motion came on the scene, and he didn't just change the game. I mean, watch. He started doing this thing that no one had ever imagined with juggling, and people couldn't believe it, right? Like, this guy, he didn't, and this wasn't his main thing. He was like an illusionist. He was really into much deeper kinds of things. But the way that he thought about 3 balls, what were possible, was different. And so it's just a subtle thinking about something different. Like, and anybody watching this, especially if you're young and you're just starting out in your career and you're not sure, like, your perspective is valuable. The way that you approach problems, the way that you think about something, you might not think it's that big of a deal. Like, your mental model, you might think that, it's not that big of a deal, but it is, right? It is, because this guy just had a different mental model. He just approached these 3 balls differently than anybody else. Anybody could have thought of this, but it was him. And the jugglers and everybody went ape over this guy. They were like, holy crap, like, this is really amazing. This is like Tron when they remake these movies, and I'm stoked. Tron, the new Tron's coming out like October, I think it is.
Oh, there's a third Tron coming out.
Yeah, in October.
Oh,
dude, it's gonna be badass, right? But this kind of thinking, reimagining these movies, these stories that have existed before, like, I love it, right? Because these directors, like Dune, Dune, dude. Have we had the Dune conversation?
No.
Oh, and I know I don't know where our time is, but this is like
it doesn't matter. Personal. This is cool.
It's super personal to me because, like, I grew up in a very strict Nazarene house. I couldn't have secular music or literature or anything like that. And when I was about 13, I wasn't quite 13, I was 12, and I went to this farmhouse to help this family, like some family friends move. They were moving out of this farmstead. The matriarch had died, and they were moving all this stuff off this estate. And we had to move all this stuff. And there was this barn filled with Foot Locker's trunks full of books. And she's like, go out there and I'll meet you out there. I went out there and like it was forever before anybody showed up. So I was like, I started looking through these books and I found Dune and I started reading it. And she came out. She's like, oh, you're going to love that. You should keep that. And here's the second and third book of the trilogy. And I hid that trilogy in my house for 4 years and read Dune in parallel. The Bible was it. That was the only thing we were allowed to read. And I grew up like 12 to, I got out of my house when I was 16, reading Dune in parallel with the Bible. And when David Lynch's version came out, I hated it. I was like, oh my God, they left so much storytelling money on the table. Like,
was David Lynch's version, that wasn't the sci-fi version, and that was good, right?
No, I thought it was terrible. I thought Lynch didn't even really want to make it. He did that so he could get funding to do Blue Velvet.
Okay, right? So they were like, "Hey, here's your smash hit," and he's like, "This."
His heart wasn't in it. His heart wasn't in it. He was like, oh, "If I do this, I can make the movie I want to make." Right. Blue Velvet, epic, right? It was totally worth it.
Of course.
But Dune was like whatever. Sting had a moment. It was cool, but otherwise it was.
The Sting version, that was a horror.
Yeah.
I'm talking about the Sci-Fi Channel did one in the 2000s that I thought was pretty decent because I've read all the books too.
I vaguely remember that, but the one Denis made, like this part 1 and part 2, unbelievable. Like you're happy with those, dude. I am beyond happy. I'm so grateful because I stopped talking about it. I grew up, I was fixated. I thought this story's got everything, man. Like it's not Lord of the Rings. Lord of the Rings is great. It's like fantasy. It's like, more traditional, like, in a perfect world.
It's good it's pure good versus pure evil.
But it's not really outcomes. It's not really how the world works, right?
Right.
Like, Dune's a cautionary tale, right? It's a cautionary tale. Like Paul starts out this amazing potential, but he compromises. He does things he feels he has to do the right thing, but he becomes a villain.
I'm sorry, that's right? Paul Atreides, correct?
Paul Atreides,
and is Paul Atreides is he the son? He is the focal point of Dune, right? It's not the dad.
I don't know. That's a tough call. I think that the girl is, I think in some ways the focal point, right? I think it's written kind of from her perspective, which was captivating to me because everything was written from a male point of view in the Bible, right? And so reading Dune was like, wow, they pay attention. Like there's two sides. There's the female, side to these things, and the Bene Gesserit, right? The Bene Gesserit play a huge role in Dune, right? And so it was very captivating, and it was very contrast. And Dune is a very great contrast to the Bible. It's also, there's a lot of kind of Muslim and Islamic references, right? So there's a much more worldview, right? It's a top-heavy, westernized view,
patriarchal Western Christianity, right?
Yeah, right. So I really appreciated that, growing up in a house that was very narrow in its views generally. But I think that, speaking of iterations and perspective, the way Denis built this, this director interpreted this story, I think he absolutely, achieved something, because the first Dune, the one Lynch did, he didn't get the vision. He didn't understand what Herbert was trying to transmit at all, but I feel like that's very intact. I think he really, the part 1 and part 2, these most latest versions, I think they honor the vision very well, and, one of the things that I do, I row a lot. I spend a lot of time rowing. I have a new awesome rowing machine in the house. And I use a real, I keep track of time with a real timer. I don't allow any tech in there. And I don't know if you've ever used one of these hourglasses, but they're really, everybody's bored of hearing me talk about it. Get an hourglass, dude. Like, get an hourglass in your house. This is sped up. It's an hour-long one. But that is like perspective shifting, right? Watching time. Because you could argue that Bitcoin is a store of time.
Right.
It is value, right? And I start thinking about time differently, even as, as more passes and I age. Like, time is really the only real value, and these little pieces that when I walk downtown, when I walk around with a camera and just kind of make these montages that I put up on projectors and stuff, it's really that love affair with time. Art, on Bitcoin is really, in a sense, time passing, and things, AI is going to be able to simulate a lot of this, and it's easy to kind of lose touch with concrete time, but like, I don't know, have to say it's cool for if you want to build a video game really fast, AI is great for that, or determine like, make something really eye-catching, but really it's about identity, like who are we in this moment, and what does time, mean to you versus me, or it's very personal. Right. And I think as all this tech unfolds and more of this complexity unfolds, it's the simple things become, it brings a little more clarity to the essentials for me. And that's maybe kind of the long and short of what I wanted to talk about today.
No, that's super cool. Like, do you think AI is that your main focus now, or is AI just yet another thing to realize? Like, a lot of these things you talked about, what you've taught me over the years is like most major hacks you've been socially engineered. So
Most of them, yeah.
Hmm?
Yeah, most of them. I mean, most of the crime that we see in the wild, it's not like Hollywood where someone's hacking into a system. We're in. It's not like that, right? It's more nuanced than that. It's a lot of more social engineering, as you said, right? It's stories. It's convincing real people to do things they wouldn't ever really want to do, And so phishing is the biggest one. Be careful of those links that you click, and DMs especially, right? DMs are not really, we don't have the filtering and the spam controls in DMs that we do for email, right? So your DMs, be careful if you get a text message from an unknown sender. I mean, the people that you care about or that you really need to communicate with, they know how to get in touch with you.
Right? In multiple ways, mind you. Like you said, if you have a passcode, be like, okay, text me. And obviously, if they're in big trouble, you have to make a decision. But if they can't type or say that word, then it's a scam. And you're saying the phishing is getting exponentially better because, like you said, now they have Chat GPT. They can phrase it super well. It's not like you said, name, like hello sir, be like delete,
right.
like all of the normal things. Like, I know the phishing that gets sent to my inbox, like, I mean, my God, the amount, like I seem to always have these bills I couldn't remember on PayPal for $1,387. It's always the same amount. But some of these, like, I just got one from a lawyer and he's like, dude, you haven't paid yet. And you owe, and it makes you, you're like, do I know that name? Like, it's a common name. I'm like, have I interacted with this person? Like you just have to be so aware. And I always try and tell my kids, I'm like, always, like, never click, always just like, if it's your bank, go to the bank, like go to the bank or type it in your own URL. Cause if you click that one link, you could be dead. Cause it sounds like you're saying it takes for them is to run that little executable and you may be done.
Yeah. I mean, it's my aunt, that story, she lost 7,000 euro to a completely preventable crime. And I think it's important to normalize using that word criminal, right? They're not hackers, not scammers. Scammers like, oh, scammer.
Right.
No, they're criminals.
A scammer's a prankster,
they're
right?
Criminals, right. Criminals is what they are, right? And it's a multi-billion-dollar industry. And the more we start normalizing that and, kind of demystifying that, the better, the more safe the internet will be, for work and play. Because that's the criminals love that. They're using misinformation to their advantage. They're using our neurology, that they know that when you make us panic, it kind of knocks us off our game and we don't always make the best choices. I mean, I don't know about you, but when I'm stressed or feel rushing myself, I tend to make more mistakes.
Or if you're tired. Yeah. Like we were talking about with the kids the other night at dinner about how advertising has learned to literally go
wear
right
you down.
past. No, but it's wear you down with repetition, but it's also they hijack you emotionally. They go past the thinking part of your brain and they can tap right into your emotion. And if you're tired, and that's how, when you get your Bitcoin stolen, when you get hacked, like a lot of times, like I remember one time there was a really clever one on Discord where the guy's like, hey, like this guy's going to sell this. And we're like, okay, be careful. And he was kind of updating us in real time. And he's like, yeah, this one person that we all know is going to mediate and whatever. And he started talking more. And I was like, dude, stop. stop. He goes, it's weird because I sent this thing, but it's like, I was like, I saw it because I was a third party, but we're all like progressively, I'm like, no, something sounds weird. Like the price is too good to be true, but the way they're doing it, what they did was on Discord, they are just some random person. You accept their friend request and they're like, hey, hello friend, small talk. So what they do then is they wait like 6 or 7 months. Then they mask as a person, they delete the whole conversation. They're like, dude, I know you want to sell your thing. I've got it for you. They'll give you 0.75 Bitcoin. So it seems reasonable. Your hopes are up. And then they have the transaction and then they put you in a 3-way chat. And then all of a sudden it happens so fast. And they're like, hey, send us this to the intermediary who and then obviously the intermediary gets it and they are gone. So that's happened to me a couple times where I like right away, I know, because I'm just not going to do transactions on there. So I'll string them along. I'll be like, I sent it. And they're like, you idiot. Like they're getting so frustrated with me. And I'm like, hey, fuck you. Like
that's what Kit Boga and Nick,
well, they're pros
doing,
at it.
Right?
I'm just like, I've seen I love their stuff.
But that's what you can do, right? I mean, we should all feel empowered to push back and be ridiculous, right? If someone calls me and and for some reason I end up in a situation I don't answer, I don't really know. Here's a question for you. What good are phone numbers anymore? Like, what do we need those for?
What good are social security numbers? Like my whole family has already been hacked. Every company I've ever worked for, my accountant, not my current one, my old accountant got hacked. Not only did the families get hacked, man. The kids got hacked. And when a kid's under 18, you can't put a freeze on it because of some arcane rule. So you have to wait till they're 18.
That's on the state. The rules are different state by state.
Oh, and then our state sucks because it's just okay. But social security numbers, you have to imagine that every social security number, I mean, shit, they're only 9 or 10 digits, like they're all out there anyway. Every single one's has been stolen. So like we need to move to new. Like you said, crypto has been fighting to be this new infrastructure. It's come through the concrete of this old fiat system, and slowly, obviously, we're replacing stuff. Obviously, too, if I have my private keys and I sign everything with my private keys, if those get hacked, then I'm in big trouble. So it's not like you can just do a 1-for-1. Hey, government, now we have private keys, because you still have to have a way to then nullify those and get a new or whatever. But like, it doesn't solve everything, but it certainly is 18 steps in the right direction. Right.
Yeah. Well said, man. Well said. I don't think it's going to be long. I'm already having conversations. I got invited to participate in, another startup. They want to simplify things and help, solve some practical problems. And in the end, really, it's about a permanent, immutable record. Right. Like if you're someone that has special needs, for example, and, this is becoming more and more, the case with a lot of boomers, that had special needs, their friends and loved ones are starting to die. And so their advocates, their regents are starting to die. And there's no one around to tell the story of how to best care for these people or what they need. Mm-hmm. So we need a permanent record, right? If you're a young human, and you matriculate out of the services, this state, Illinois is terrible, because once you pass 18, like there's a few work study kinds of things that might fill up some of your time, but there's really not much. If you have a profoundly impacted child that, as they age, there's less and less options. You might have to move to a different state. And so having records, having something permanent, on chain that's reliable and, it's secure and, you can have some control over the privacy versus none. I think who wouldn't be excited about that?
Right. So not just obviously Bitcoin is the layer 0 of currency, but the layers 0 of information and permanent storage. As long as we have a couple miners humming along somewhere on, natural energy somewhere in the world, like the chain marches on, right? And like you said,
well, I mean, that's what I love that's what I've learned from you and, your audience about ordinals. And I know there's a lot of polarized views about ordinals and runes and all these kinds of things, but what it means to me, what I hear is sovereignty is also, being able to attribution. right, to an artist, like tie that back to an original work. And I think that's, we've wanted something like that since the internet first took hold. People were copying and pasting everything. And well, where did this originally come from? Before TinEye and some of these reverse image lookup tools, showed up, you couldn't tell. You had no way to find the origin of any idea or any imagery or artwork or whatever you want to call it. And that excites me a lot, especially for future generations, because they'll be able to, get credit for their iterations, right? I mean, imagine if, like the Dune, we didn't have a way to verify that this was an original movie made, fast forward 100, 200 years from now. There's going to have to be a better way to manage these intellectual ideas.
Yeah, you keep talking about Dune and Tron. I just have to show you this. Oh, cool. I forgot I set you up here. I have the capital W and whimsical. But this is a collection that just came out. It's super cool, and it might be something you're interested in. It's called Enigma by Cybersea, but he is a huge, you can probably guess what movie he's a huge fan of, but he loves his Tron. And basically this art, so you see the little, Tron cycles in the maze, that depending on how many transactions, each block that'll change. If there's a super heavy block, those will get faster. So this art is linked to certain aspects of the blockchain. Another thing that's cool is people who, when they minted this, if they had certain PFPs from other collections, namely his first collection, which was called Deus Ex, and another collection that's big in the art scene called On-Chain Monkeys. They were one of the first ones to teleburn over from Ethereum. Super cool stuff. But if you had one of those, the art on this would change. But this is a total homage to Tron. But I wanted to share it with you because I thought it was it's just super cool, the things that people are doing. So obviously you and I are talking about conversations and immutable information on Bitcoin, but there's the translation on art that is connected by these recursive endpoints to the blockchain. So just so much cool stuff that's going on. And I might have to see, I have an extra one. We might need to find a gift for Chad because it's right up your alley. And to me, like interviewing some of these artists is so cool because that like Cybersea is one of those that is really pushing the envelope, what can be done, just like you are with, like you said, you're a translator, and how to express something to someone where you're not slapping them the hand, you're not shaming them. You're basically saying like, hey, here's what happened, here's how this works, and here are things you can do. And like you said, you ingrain it in your pattern, and there's no way to be 100% unhackable unless you literally like throw all your computers away, don't own anything, and literally live in a Faraday cage. But for the rest of us, like take precautions. Like you said, the low-hanging fruit is 2FA. Would you, as we're kind of summing all this up, would you say password, not LastPass because I know they got hacked, but like LastPass, where
password managers, password managers are worthwhile. One of the things I think that are commonly overlooked about password managers, I mean, there's a learning curve, right, to using a password. There's some intention required to use a password manager, but one of the things I encourage people to do, use a password manager, is even if you're not going to use it in your day-to-day, right? Some people find it annoying or, kind of a nuisance. It helps you build an inventory of all the accounts you have online, because the worst thing that can happen, and I'm not a huge believer in cybersecurity. You know this about me. Like, I don't know that cybersecurity ever really existed on a personal level. I think it's dead. I think, what makes more sense to me is a resilience model. Like, how prepared am I for the worst day of my life, right? How prepared am I for, someone takes over my primary email address? What's the worst that can happen? What kind of preparations do I have? That's how I tend to approach the world. I kind of build to fail, right? and that gives me peace of mind. And one of the things that creates a lot of peace of mind in people about password managers is password managers create, here my camera automatically turns off. It's a wellness hack so that I don't work for all night, and I actually can keep track of time. Oh, that was 30 minutes. Okay. Is when we set up a password manager originally, it'll take you like a weekend, right? My wife just did this. I think I don't know how how many times she's migrated between password managers. She moves every couple of years, and she moved to a new one. And it took her about a weekend. Is it builds an online inventory of all your accounts. So that way, the gods forbid, like something happens to me
Right.
that requires me to go and triage that stuff. I'm not building that inventory on the worst day of my life. Right.
Right.
So I think about password managers as like multiple, it creates a lot of peace of mind for me that, I have that. And also, what do you think the most common question that I get about password managers, Blue?
Can I use the same password over and over, or
Ooh, I do get that one sometimes. That, if you are doing that, if you're listening to this and you're reusing password, go change that now, because criminals love that. Nothing makes it easier for them. They call it password stuffing or credential stuffing. When they find a password in a breach, a data set, these distributions get shared eventually, in forensic, analysis and stuff with researchers. And so they can get that password. They're going to try it on against Yahoo. They're going to try it against Chase. They're going to try it against all your schwack. So if you have the same password in one account, you're going to get pwned. You're going to get owned across all of them.
Right.
So if you're listening to this, stop right now and go fix that and make sure you have unique passwords everywhere. But the most common question that I get is, yeah, but what if they hack my password manager? You're right. If a criminal, gets access to your password manager, it shouldn't be game over. Which is why if you choose to use a password manager, and I encourage you to, don't put the whole password in them. Salt them. We call them salts, which means that I save a piece of it, like a word or a phrase that's only in my mind, that I add to the beginning or the end. Some people put it in the middle, everybody's level of complexity. So that way, even if somebody, gets access to my password manager, it's useless to them.
Oh, I love that.
Right? So add a salt to the beginning or the end. Maybe you're a Cubs fan and you're like, oh, the Cubs will win the pennant again this year.
Right.
And that you add that to the end. Let the password manager generate your long passphrase, but then don't put your cipher or your passphrase on the end of it. But when you create that account, add that. But then don't update the password manager.
Right. So basically, it's crazy numbers, Cubbies, and at the very worst, they get in, but they're not gonna start experimenting with salts. They're just gonna move on to the next guy.
No, dude. And a lot of these are automated tools, right? I mean, there's so many of these kinds of patterns, these attack patterns we see in the wild that are automated, right? There's very little human interaction. I mean, criminals are like anybody. They're lazy. They want to get the most return on their investment for time, right? They're not going to invest a lot of time.
I love that criminal ROI, because you're right. They want to cast the widest net and then see what filters through and then attack those people.
Generally. So we want to raise the cost for them. So then they go down the block and find a bike that's easier to steal, as it were. Right. And I think that's kind of the mindset we need to have, is what kinds of little things can I do? That's what I try to do. I really just try to add value to people's life by minimizing their anxiety a little bit, because that's what security is to me. It's about managing those anxieties.
Yeah, no, I like that. And I think to bring it home, you and I had an interesting conversation. And I think what I might do, Chad, I might break this, because there's very two distinct parts to this chat we've had. It was kind of like you and I reminiscing and talking about neurodivergence, and there was a lot of value there. But then you showed us how you share with Kraken. You shared us about the culture of Kraken. I feel like there's two very distinct. So I may break this in two. So we might as well clip 2 hours and beyond, and maybe I'll delete this little section or maybe not. But you and I talked at the beginning. I've been debating for a while, anon versus not anon. Obviously I'm showing my face. It's out there. Your name's out there. You work, for Kraken. I loved that one layer of anonymity just to protect maybe where I live or the family, or, but I know you're saying it's all about trust, but I think with Blue Toshi can create trust. Why, and this was our offline chat, but why do you think going that last step of giving my name isn't as big of a deal as I think it is? And just then having my show, it's still Blue Node, but I'm, Nolan Blue or whatever, you know what I mean?
People, we like to know who we're dealing with, right? It doesn't really matter, like if you're a recruiter and you're using an alias, that might leave somebody feeling a certain way. And, this authenticity that people talk about, ad nauseum.
Shadow dancer, the recruiter.
Yeah.
For Google.
It's a real thing. I think a lot of it too is like, hey, we're in this together.
Right.
Like we're really, we're putting it out there. I think there were a lot of, the hacker community can be kind of fickle. And, and I may get some blowback for this, but I think it's worth saying, like the last hacker conference I went to, October, I think was, it's interesting having conversations about crypto in groups of, the hacking community. In groups, they generally tend to be down on it, or historically.
Right.
But you get them one-on-one and they're like, fix the money, fix the world. And I think the reason for a lot of this alias is people don't want to be wrong. I mean, that's what I've observed. I think people, they don't want to put their name on the line with something that might be popular and cool today, and fast forward 5 or 10 years and now they're married and they have this job and everything's different and they have this permanent record of the internet online. And I think that creates, a layer of abstraction, of safety, of comfort or whatever. I'm not saying you, but I say generally that's kind of the vibe that I get from people, is they want to kind of, insulate themselves from being wrong. Not just about crypto, but a lot of things, security, certainly, there's a lot of that, people don't want to make too many wild predictions.
Right.
But, I think when we put our name out there and we put our name on something, it has a little bit more value, because it's like, oh, they're really standing up for that. They're really standing behind that, and some of my favorite, my mentors, the people that have influenced me the most and really have, shaped the way I feel about, people in the world, they wouldn't do that. They would absolutely put their name on it, because it's legit, legitimizes it, and it removes all doubt, certainly opens them up to a lot more scrutiny. But the people in our lives, like the TED talkers and people like that, like they're not using aliases. They're getting up there with their first and last name, and in front of God and everybody. And so that just carries, it hits different for me. I'm more apt to follow somebody. I'm less apt to follow somebody if they're using that abstraction. Let's put it that way. I mean, there's a lot of that especially like the ETH, and Bitcoin space, because, obviously people have a lot of wealth. They have a lot of things that they want to, protect. But it's a personal decision. I don't think there's any right or wrong answer, man. I think, you have to do what makes sense for you and your loved ones and your friends, and, everybody's values are a little bit different, and, battles of safe never be won. But, I was hesitant for a while, and I really just kind of got tired of hiding, and in the end, I selfishly, after I'm gone, I want my son and his pals to be able to, pull up some things about me and what I spent my time thinking about and exerting energy on. And I guess that's kind of, the legacy isn't, I don't really care about, Michael Jordan or Britney Spears or any of these.
Right,
I care about my own mythology, and so I guess that's kind of selfishly why I became more public facing, because these are the things I believe in. These are the things I spend my time doing. And, yeah, it's a tough question, man. That's it's personal for everybody.
Yeah,
it's different.
No, it is a tough one. And you just, like, my thing is just like security. Like, are the $5 wrench attacks going to get more? And if Bitcoin does go to, 1,600,000, like, are people who were in Bitcoin early and who have valued it early, are they at higher risk? I don't know. I guess it depends on society. I don't know what those answers are. Obviously, when you show your face out there, with
it doesn't really matter once you show your face. It's even your geo, any image at all. It's pretty trivial.
You're saying, yeah, because we've done, I own a software company, and Amazon recognition. We were like, oh, facial recognition isn't there yet. This was obviously 6-7 years ago, and then we tried theirs. We're like, well, okay, and it was like we experimented, like, half a face, like, the eyes, like it was good. And I was very surprised at how good it was. And that was 5 or 6 years ago when we first started playing with it. Now with AI and stuff, it's just gotten better. So you're saying it's so thinly veiled now. I guess you keep the lazy from finding you, but everyone else, like if they want to, you do it, and
if they're motivated. Yeah, if they're motivated. I mean, you've dropped a few details, curling, part of the general geographic area, it would be trivial.
Yeah, but dude, everyone's a curler.
Right.
It's like
I'm just saying, like, that
100%.
Once you start really scrutinizing that, it's really, and that's kind of where I'm coming from. Is I used to spend a lot of effort. I used to exert a lot of energy to try to minimize those kinds of things. And I was like, you know what, this is pointless now. It's kind of impossible. So I might as well get out what I want to get out. I might as well get some value from it selfishly. And that's kind of the point I got to, was I'm not going to live in the shadows and live in fear. Certainly rent attack, fine. There's multi-sig, like, I can't kill me because I can't help you today.
Right.
That's basically kind of where I'm at. And I feel like that, it could be true, but the crime hasn't changed. It's always been around. It's as old as the hills. And if I lived my whole life crippled in fear by it, what a waste. I get this one life, and I want to, transmit the kinds of things that I think have value. And, some things are worth the risk. Discovering beauty of any kind requires risk.
That's beautifully said, Chad. That's beautifully said. Well, God, it's like there's so much more I want to ask you, but I think this is a great stopping point for today. Chad, thank you so much for coming on the show. Like it was cool because like we went through memory lane, but then like learning what you do at Kraken and how you share it with people, because learning about this productive paranoia, it dare I say, it can be fun. And, maybe all those years you were in advertising, you're able to bypass maybe some of the thinking brain to reach more deeper emotionally, to just give. And it's not like you're doing these things like you got to do this. Oh, you're not doing this. You're basically like, dude, 2FA, like it's like boom, ba boom, ba boom, like it's on a pillow. It's okay.
You'll sleep better at night. I swear, these little things that don't have, we're not always conscious of, right, have a cost. And cumulatively, when COVID first hit, you and I had conversations about this. Like, I think I did talk to you. I mean, I wrote a blog post about this on my personal blog about like toenail clippers. I remember everybody's talking about self-care. So I was like, one afternoon, I was in between things and I made lists. I made a list of things that I didn't have control over. And I made a list of things that I do. And toenail clippers was like one thing I put on there. I was like, yeah, why have I accepted these nail clippers? Like in the shower, like I don't know how many times I dropped these things for years. Have I just accepted that there's no better solution? And I went out there and I tried to find a better toenail. And you know what? I found one. And I thought, if I could reduce my anxiety and my stress around this one little thing, and I could do that on 12 or 20 or 30 things, that has a cumulative effect, right? And so in a lot of ways, I was grateful. I mean, I'm not going to ever say I'm grateful for COVID, but I'm grateful for some of the outcomes that I had personally through that experience, because I was able to eliminate a lot of these really small little micro, like offensive things in my life that just really reduced a lot of cognitive load that I didn't realize were there.
Yeah, it's so funny because I'm definitely in the, like, I'm good at fixing stuff up around the house and all that stuff. Yeah. But there are things like I'm the guy who's like, here's where it'll start. I'm like, I need socks. I'm low on socks. Most of my socks have holes in them. And then like a month later, I'm like, like I need socks. And
have you seen the meme about the underwear?
No, I mean, I'm going to be driving like towards Dick's kind of, but then I'll forget for like another month. And like 3 months later, I'm like, I got like no socks. And like now I'm wearing in the middle of winter, I'm wearing like the ankle length socks. And like my ankles are cold, but you know what? I need socks. And then like one day, like I buy socks and then I buy like 4 or 5 and I'm like, these socks are awesome. And like in the winter, like I love socks. Like when I was a kid, I wore socks that went right below my knees, you know, and it makes it's a very comfort feel for me. I get them from Duluth, whatever, up in the Minnesota company, like warm. And these socks are like,
Duluth Trading.
They're Duluth Trading. Thank you. They're compressy. They have good underwear too, but it's compressy and they go high and they just make my legs don't get cold, but I like having those socks pulled up under my pants. And you know what? I get the socks and I'm like, I got the socks. And then you're like, wait, what other improvements can I? And I think that pretty much sums up all dudes, I think, or at least all non-super anal dudes. And hey, hats off to you anal dudes for doing it sooner. I'm just like, I have to go through this bizarre process to get to, hey, you know what? Maybe the fact that I have a whole butt cheek showing with a piece of my underwear flap, because it still fits. The elastic still hasn't just, the rubber bands still have a little where it doesn't just fall off right when I take my pants off. But, you know, now I'm like, you know what? Maybe I should get new underwear. Like, I'm good.
Yeah, dude. And it reduces your anxiety. Like it's peace of mind. It makes you feel 10 feet tall, right? And I think anything we can do for each other that makes us feel a little taller, a little more confident, you know, it just adds so much value. And it's selfishly, you know, it's not a selfless thing to me. Like it makes me feel better, right? It makes me feel like I'm being useful. I'm doing my best. I'm showing up, right? And I think that's kind of at the end of the conversation. That's my goal. And I'm grateful, you know, that the people that I work for and with value that too.
Yeah. Well, I'm grateful for you, Chad. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Let's talk after, but we got to do this again. Cause now that we've like a first interview is always like, you got to go there. You got to go back. You got to go forwards. You got to go everywhere. But now we have the present canvas to paint on, but I loved having you on the show and I'd love to have you back.
Thanks for having me, man. Always a pleasure, Blu.
Yeah. Take care, everybody. Thanks for watching. Please tell your friends, follow us on the YouTubes and obviously on X, Blu Toshi. Follow Chad at Whimsical, WIMZKL. He is a great person and I'm lucky to know him. So Chad, take care, brother.
Likewise. Ciao, everybody.
Ciao. What?